introduce AaronBrown, who's going to give us some interesting information and attacks around different things that you can do to maybe trick some of the accessibility features that are out there. So I hand it over to Aaron. Please put your hands together. Thank you.
All right. Y'all weren't warned, but there's going to be a little bit of participation. First off, I need to know
you can't trust your ears.
This works, if we can hear audio samples.
You can't trust your ears.
More volume?
You can't trust your ears.
There we go. Okay, thank you. So thanks for coming. My talk is entitled, You Can't Trust Your Ears, an introduction to homophone attacks and other screen reader abuse. It's a little hard that I can't play these audio clips. I have to look over my shoulder. Oops. This is much easier when I don't have to work across screens.
Hello, hacker family. Welcome to ShmooCon Hack the Planet.
There we go. Hack the planet. So first off, I'll start with who. My name is AaronBrown. I'm also known as the Tarquin. I'm currently a senior security engineer at Google. I can be found at Mastodon at omg.wtf.sh/thetarquin. My two email addresses are root@wtf.sh or the.tarquin@gmail.com. If you want to get me on a phone, please don't. But if you want to get me on Signal, please ask. Happy to chat with folks over Signal. For those of you who may be watching this stream or listening to the stream later who have low visual acuity, I'm a tall, heavy-set man with a graying beard, just so you can kind of put a visual image on it. This slide covers disclaimers. There's quite a few of them for this talk, for which I apologize, but they're all important. The first point reads, my current lack of accessibility needs. I do not currently require or use a screen reader for everyday computer use. So I'm not a blind person, but I work with and consulted with several blind and low visual acuity folks before I gave this talk, before I came here today. I'm just a security researcher who's fascinated by the ways that computers can be used to lie to us and who really, really cares about getting this stuff right. The second point reads, I will describe slides. I will do my best to describe the contents of slides for blind and low vision members of the audience, or for those of you who are a little bit hungover and prefer to watch with your eyes closed. That's cool too, no judgment. If I slip up and don't describe everything on the slide, I apologize, and feel free to ask me to do so during the presentation. I will make the slides available after the talk so folks can read them. I also have a very complete speaker notes that should cover all of the substance of my comments attached to those slides so that you can get that information later as well. The third point reads accidental ableism. I reviewed my slides and presentation notes with blind and low vision and disabled folks, and I do my best to make sure that my presentation is free of latent ableism. I apologize in advance if I slip up with that. If you feel that anything in this talk is ableist or in any way unfair, please reach out to me so I can learn and improve. The fourth point is that these attacks work against all screen readers to different extents. So the trouble is it affects them in different ways. This is unfortunate because there's a lot of screen readers out there. Wikipedia currently lists 24 that are in active use and development, and a bunch of other ones that are deprecated. Of course, folks in this room know that deprecated does not mean no longer used. So those are all out there as well and have similar problems to the ones we're going to be talking about today. The diversity of this, the saving grace of this is that the diversity of screen readers means that many of these attacks that work very well with one are garbled or ineffective with another. So the diversity of the tools out there mean that for some of this stuff, an attacker would need to know which screen reader is being used or find one that works well across most of the population of screen readers. For the purposes of this talk, all of my recordings were made with Chromevox. This is because I regularly use Chrome OS, and Chromevox is bundled with Chrome OS, so it was the thing that was convenient for me. And finally, of course, views are my own. This is personal research undertaken on my own initiative, and my employer doesn't endorse anything I've done here. I'm not here in anything resembling an official capacity. Believe me, if I were, I'd be behaving myself much better. And finally, a note about the audio. It sucks because I recorded it in the most convoluted way possible. I couldn't find a way to record Chromevox directly from the audio bus, so I had to do a screencast piped through speakers that then were picked up by the mic on the laptop. Hackers persevere, even if they do it in the squirreliest way possible. So you'll hear some dings and some back chatter and things like that in the audio. It's my fault for thinking, surely 2 days before the conference is a fine time to cut audio clips for this. Okay, why? This slide is labeled why. I am a two-time philosophy school dropout, and so I think it's always an important question to ask. There are 3 reasons why I wanted to research this topic. The first reason is the hacker joy. I love breaking things. One of the reasons I do what I do is because I love it when I can make absurd things happen. I started getting into homophone attacks as an extension of my work on homoglyphs. Homoglyphs are Unicode visual look-alike characters. And I found a whole other fractal area of ways to break systems, and quite frankly, that delighted me. The second reason is to help friends and loved ones. I'm blessed with many good friends in my life, and some of them benefit from accessibility tools like screen readers. Many others likely will one day. Once I scratched the surface here, I started to realize that my friends were at risk from these attacks, and I wanted to do something about it. And third, because I fucking hate bullies. I'm a hacker because of point number 1. I work in security because of point number 3. I do what I do because I want people to be able to spend their lives living their lives, right? I want them to be able to spend their time in whatever way they choose, and I want them to be happy and not terrorized by hackers or stalkers or abusive exes or anything like that, or suffering from the consequences of breaches. And the shitty thing about bullies is bullies target the people they target people with disabilities disproportionately. They actually seek out people with disabilities to target. Okay, that's why me. This slide is labeled, but why us? Why should you in the audience care? And here's a few reasons. First, if you work in security, as many of you do, security has to be for everyone in order to work. If your cloud admin uses a screen reader and gets phished with one of these attacks, you're just as owned as if they were phished, as if the attackers had phished a sighted admin using more traditional techniques. Second, you should care because you or a loved one will probably be disabled someday. Considering only vision loss, about a quarter of folks eventually experience vision loss significant enough to change the way they live their day-to-day lives. And it's the leading cause of loss of independence in older folks, right? So looking out here, I spot maybe call it 80 to 100 people. That means there's dozens of people out there who someday will personally be potentially at risk for these attacks, right? And finally, because committed attackers don't pull punches. If someone wants to attack your organization, they're not going to avoid targeting your disabled employees. In fact, they're likely to specifically target them if they think that's a better way to get in. Okay, that's all the front matter out of the way. So let's just jump into it and talk about what is a homophone attack. This slide contains a definition of homophone attacks. Homophone attacks are attacks that leverage the similarity in the sound of 2 strings when read either by humans or text-to-speech software. Some researchers led by Nick Nikiforakis of Stony Brook University published a paper called Sound Squatting, uncovering the use of homophones in domain squatting in 2014 that looked at the use of native English language homophones for domain squatting and phishing attacks. This focused primarily on real words in the English language that are common in domain names, sound alike but are spelled differently. So for instance, think sale, S-A-L-E, and sale, S-A-I-L, right? Among other experiments, they registered 30 sound-squatted domains and observed significant volumes of human traffic as people natively confused those homophones and mistyped things into their browser or things like that. They also identified several active threat actors using homophone domains for distributing malware and engaging in phishing attacks. For instance, by using the domain inbox.lv, spelled INNBOX.lv, instead of inbox with one N. So this raises the question, if I can find my cursor, sorry. So this raises the question, if these are used by threat actors to target everyone, why am I focusing on screen readers? And there are two primary reasons. First, screen reader users are at significantly increased risk of falling victim to these attacks, as they are limited in their ability to double check the spelling of things visually. And secondly, there are novel homophone attacks that I don't believe have been discussed anywhere else that specifically target screen reader users. So this slide is blank and just titled what the attack sounds like. This is where I mentioned before there's going to be a little bit of audience participation. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to play an audio clip of 4 different domain names read by a screen reader. One of them is the domain name google.com, spelled like you're used to, Google.com. I'll play the audio twice, then I'm going to ask you to take a brief poll of which you think is the real Google.com. So here's that audio once.
Google.com. 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 Google.com.
Okay. We'll play it again.
Google.com. 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 Google.com.
All right, raise your hand if you think it was number 1. A few folks. Raise your hand if you think it was number 2. Yeah, a lot of folks, majority of folks. Number 3. Okay, a few smattered folks. And number 4. Again, a few smattered folks. So there's kind of broad consensus that number 2 is the actual Google.com. But I lied to you. Okay, I'm sorry that I lied to you. None of them was actually Google.com. I know you're shocked that a hacker would lie to you, but I promise not to do it again, and I really hope I can rebuild your trust. They were Google.com, Google.com, GEWGLE.com, GEUGOL.com, and most concerningly, katakana letter GU followed by GULL.com. Now, some of you may be wondering, is katakana letter GU valid in domain names? It is. I checked this against the most recent spec, and it's specifically supported by IDNA 2008, which is like the definitive, these are the scripts you must support if you say you support IDNs, internationalized domain names. One thing you'll notice is that aside from the first one, these aren't composed of homophonic words or like phonemes, or homophonic words. They're just bolted together phonemes that can cross languages. Screen readers are very good at mapping Unicode strings onto sounds, and attacks can use phoneme building blocks to spell out any message they want, including across scripts like in that last example. Right? So I think this gives you a good sense of kind of the scope of the basic phishing problem, right? And like I said, I'm going to focus mostly on phishing because I think that is the biggest attack vector here, but it's not just phishing, right? As a quick digression, I want to talk a little bit about things like tricking people into contacting the wrong people for support on social media, right? Especially now that Twitter is no longer Twitter, but rather X, we're seeing a huge number of scams that use lookalike accounts to try and shill cryptocurrencies or engage in support scams or things like that, right? So one example I'm worried about is these kinds of support scams, right? Imagine that you are a user that, first of all, imagine Twitter was still a thing. And imagine that you're trying to know which user to reach out to in order to get help with an issue, right?
Twitter support. Twitter support. Twitter support. Twitter support.
The question from the person in the front with the gray shirt and the blue mask was, what screen reader am I currently using? These were all recorded with ChromeVox, because it's the one that's natively bundled with the laptop I was using when I built the talk. Great question. So, to my ear, actually the first three of these that are garbled kind of sound more fluent, right? They sound better than the actual way Twitter support was read, right? And this is the problem, is you can actually do this if you play around a little bit with these phonemes, you can get it sounding really, really good. And if you're a person who, again, needs to reach out because you're being, like, you know, harassed on a site or has just technical problems or your accessibility tools aren't working, right? You won't know who can actually officially support you in that. But of course, it's Unicode. There are depths upon depths. So I've done a lot of work with Unicode and its impact on security. Mostly, my previous work's mostly been, again, in homoglyphs, visually confusable things. And one question that comes up a lot is a certain Unicode code point permitted in domain names? And there are three possible answers to that, right? One is yes. If it's in the IDNA 2008 spec, officially it's supported in IDNs. If you claim to be a registrar and a TLD, you have to support them, or else you're not standards compliant. Of course, everyone's always standards compliant all the time, right? That works. So you could say yes, it's in the spec, it is supported, right? Another question might be, well, it's not in the spec yet, but it might be in the future. So we still kind of have to worry about it, right? And the third is ask your TLD because the spec is not complete, right? Top-level domain owners get to decide what domains they support. And so, for instance, emoji are not in the IDNA 2008 spec. They are not supported in IDNs because they're not a script. However, several TLDs do support emojis in URLs, right? Screen readers, of course, also have to support the full spectrum of Unicode. These collide if we, for instance, register the domain sleepyturtle.fm, rendered as emoji, and then also as text. Since most screen readers just read the emoji as its canonical name, this creates an audio collision between the two domains, even if they go different places. Here's what that sounds like. And in this case, it's going to emit the dot in the first URL, but that's just weird behavior that depends, again, on screen reader.
Sleepy Turtle, FM. Sleepyturtle.fm.
So this slide is labeled why I own sleepyturtle.fm, and the answer is because I was working on this way too late at night, and it delighted me, and my registrar let me register this. If you go to the emoji, sleepy emoji turtle.fm, it just takes you to a Soma FM channel I like. But it gets worse, because screen readers can just lie to their users. So unfortunately, this level of subterfuge isn't required in most cases. When dealing with web page contents, screen readers typically only read the rendered DOM, like kind of item per item, and don't provide context around web page or link behavior. Some screen readers have features that will resolve where a link actually takes you, or that disables accessibility features like these tags we're going to be talking about, but it's not universal. And some of the screen reader features, some screen reader readers have features that will resolve where a link actually takes you, but this can also be defeated by links that trigger JavaScript on execution, and take the user somewhere which is like determined by some sort of JavaScript payload, which that is honestly not that different from some obfuscation techniques against sighted users, but it's definitely a principle you can use here. But where it gets interesting is in the abuse of web page accessibility features meant to improve screen reader experience. So again, this slide is titled Screen Readers Also Just Lie, and it contains a screenshot of some HTML code. This HTML code uses a feature called ARIA tags. ARIA, or Accessible Rich Internet Application Tags, are designed to allow web designers to create better experiences for users of accessibility features, right? This is actually a good thing in most cases. This helps make websites more usable for screen reader users. It's great. But since they override reading out the elements on the page, they can be used to lie to users about the contents of the page itself. In this case, a link that has text example.com and takes the user to example.com has been overridden by an ARIA tag. When a screen reader reads the rendered tag, it will speak out google.com instead, because that's what the ARIA tag contents are. This can also be used for gaslighting or targeted abuse. Users of screen readers can get delivered an abusive message that would be invisible to sighted users. Then, of course, because these live in the site code, there's issues with like injection via cross-site scripting and things like that. So anything you can do to modify the DOM, you can also inject ARIA tags and change the behavior for screen reader users. So ARIA tags serve an important function, but they also serve as an attack surface. And that's something that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been nearly enough thought given to when we change the behavior of accessibility tools for the good of the user, do we also make that misuse resistant, right? Which is hard. I don't want to say it's just we haven't thought about it and it's an easy problem to solve, because it's not. And this is going to load a video, in theory. Yeah, there we go. This is the only video in the presentation. It depicts me using a screen reader and hovering over a link that reads www.example.com. Because of the ARIA configuration, it will read out www.google.com instead. So this is me actually reading out the element that you saw the HTML for in the previous slide.
www.google.com. www.
There we go. Interestingly, there are some Unicode attacks that screen readers actually protect against. Sighted users are vulnerable to homoglyph attacks, in which lookalike characters trick them into thinking two strings are the same when they aren't. They're basically the visual equivalent of attacks we're talking about here. So here are two examples. The first appears to be google.com, spelled Google.com, but it's actually created with lookalike characters. The O's are the Armenian small letter O, and the E, I believe, is the lowercase Greek epsilon. Sorry, I didn't include the other code point in here. That's my bad. But it is not the lowercase e that you expect. The second is more subtle. So the second appears to read cc.example.com. However, it uses right to left override control characters to reverse the order of the character rendering. So it appears to read cc.example.com when it's actually moc.elpmax.cc, right? So in the audio recording you will hear ggl.com, eliding the characters that look like O's and E's. And then you will hear correctly moc.elpmax.cc, defeating the homoglyph attack using the right to left characters.
ggl.com, moc.elpmax.cc.
So this is an interesting way in which the attack surface for homoglyphs and homophones sometimes overlaps, but sometimes it's distinct, and sometimes screen readers are protected in ways that sighted users are vulnerable. You saw and heard this clip at the beginning during my audio check.
Hello hacker family, welcome to ShmooCon Hack the Planet.
So this appears to just be gibberish on the slide. But the fact that screen readers are so good at turning Unicode sounds into sounds lets us create some pretty wild messages. So again, like I said, this slide contains a string that looks like complete gibberish, but it demonstrates that we can build audio messages out of screen reader interpretation of Unicode text. So one interesting trick here is that I've used zero width spaces to break up the string. So these visually have no impact on the spacing between the letters, but they act as hints to the screen reader of when it should end a phoneme or end an audio chunk, right? This also hints towards an interesting side use of this behavior, hiding messages in apparent gibberish for other screen reader users. A kind of screen reader user Cant, or a form of like steganography, right? Combine this with the fact that screen readers support phonemes from any script, and users can mix and match Unicode code points at will to sound out messages they want to send. And the more scripts they pull from, the more incomprehensible it will actually be to sighted folks. So this slide contains some Chinese characters. I want to thank my colleague Yuan Yu, who is fluent in Mandarin, for confirming to me that this is absolute gibberish. I don't speak Mandarin. I did this entirely by picking characters and seeing how the screen reader read them. And then I went to my friend Yuan and was like, Yuan, I'm not saying anything embarrassing or terrible, am I? And she's like, no, you're not saying anything at all. This doesn't make any sense. I was like, great, exactly what I was hoping for. So if there is some deeper meaning here, I apologize, but I'm like 99% sure this is just gibberish. Until, of course, you read it in Chromebox.
北西在 you. Fully tonight. Go to see Joe. He can't pay Yore. Bye.
So it's not like totally like easily to figure out what that says in English. So while it's maybe not the cleanest rendition of a secret message, this was me playing around for like 15 minutes and figuring out like the basics. I think it demonstrates the point that you can embed messages across languages by abusing homophone phoneme collisions. This slide contains the English version of the message I was trying to send. Hey, she saw you, flee tonight, go to see Joe, he can pay your way, bye. Here's that audio again.
北西在 you. Fully tonight. Go to see Joe. He can't pay Yore. Bye.
So this is an example of me messing around with the phonemes created by Chinese characters and creating an English message when those Chinese characters are read by the screen reader. As a side note, if someone creates a cross-lingual sentence that sends one message visually and another with screen readers, I would love to see that. I would love to, like, I think it's possible. So if y'all want a fun little like mini CTF challenge, there you go. And if you create one, let me know and I will buy you a book of your choice or, you know, post about it on Twitter or something. Right? Okay. So what do we do about this? Solving this will be hard. I wish I had a slick one-size-fits-all solution for homophone problems, but I don't think there is one, and if it exists, I haven't found it. And the problem is complicated by the fact that every screen reader or text-to-speech engine, again, is subtly different. There's no open source, publicly available map of confusable phonemes like there is with visually confusable letters. The Unicode Consortium publishes confusables.txt, which is a mapping of every character they think can be confused for any other character visually. Nothing like that exists for sounds, right? There's also not enough resources devoted to either accessibility or security, and much less even to the security of accessibility. So I think the things we can do about this, the two biggest ones are on this slide, right? First of all, talk to your users about their accessibility needs, right? Again, most people in this room, I think, work in security. You should be talking to people about what accessibility tools they use in their day-to-day work, right? And two, hunt for these attacks and share what you find. Where are my threat intel / threat hunter folks? That's any part of your job? Yeah, a few folks. Sorry to call you out like this, but we need your help. Like, we need you to be looking for this stuff, right? This is a gap with every threat intel feed I have seen. We know these exist. Nikifrakis and co. found these attacks in 2014. And attackers never forget a trick, right? If this stuff was going on in 2014, it's still going on 10 years later, right? Attacks only ever get better, and we're way behind the evildoers on protecting our users with disabilities. There are a few tactical things you can do, right? This is actually a case where your anti-phishing training can be useful, right? Update it to encourage the use of character by character or spelling mode on screen readers. This can help find a lot of these URL attacks in phishing emails. So if your users who use screen readers are suspicious, they can go into spelling mode, which will read things out one character at a time, rather than lumping things together and reading out the word, right? Suggest that if their screen reader software has a feature to resolve links instead of trusting ARIA tags, unfortunately some do and some don't, that they avail themselves of that feature, right? And of course, understand your users' accessibility needs, right? I'm gonna keep harping on this point because it's very important. Talk to them. Ask them if they'll let you sit down with them and learn how they work, right? Involve them in understanding the risks and designing the mitigations. Include them in the discussion and develop a deeper understanding of what they need to be happy, productive, and most importantly, safe in their day-to-day work. Okay, there are some more speculative things. These will require some more research, but I think they're promising ways to at least try to stop these things. So just like you can use optical character recognition, or OCR, to solve a lot of homoglyphs, it sure seems like running text-to-speech back through speech-to-text solves at least some of these attacks. Secondly, you can pressure TLD owners and registrars to step up their game in detecting collisions with high-traffic domains or ones that are likely targets for phishing. I'm sure if we all tell them they just need to sacrifice a little revenue to help a lot of people be safer, they'll jump at the chance, right? Actually, sorry. In my notes here it just says hold for laugh. Okay, maybe that one won't work. And finally, devote more resources to accessible security. If any of you are looking for research areas to make a real impact and tangentially have good topics for conference talks like this is a great place to start. We can make our users much safer by devoting some resources to both the security of accessibility tools and the accessibility of security tools. Which of course requires understanding your users' accessibility needs, right? Know who in your organization uses screen readers, right? Know if there's people who maybe use speech to text to generate emails and things like that, right? At least know what software they are using so you can at least start thinking about what other threats that brings to them and their organization so you can help them be safer. But I wanted to highlight one aspect of those more speculative approaches, right? The speech-to-text part. If anyone has seen my work on homoglyphs, I think you know where this is going. This slide is titled, "If attackers trick a sense, defenders can use that sense." And I actually think that that is a good general rule for these kinds of confusion attacks, right? So remember that horrible, vicious lie I told you earlier with the 4 different domains that sounded like google.com but weren't? This slide contains a screenshot of the automated transcript of that screencast that was taken from. And the transcript reads, google.com, 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 and crucially, it's the right version of google.com for all 4 of them, google.com, right? This is because the transcript is generated from speech-to-text interpretation of the audio. The attack is tricking the transcription engine in the same way it tricked all of us, right? But if we take the output of that speech-to-text transcription, what we're left with is actually harmless. It would take you to the quote-unquote intended domain of google.com, right? So we know this works, at least in some cases. Unfortunately, I think that this, Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, I don't think this defense scales as is. I don't think you can generally apply it to every case. I mean, the obvious ones are speech to text is overhead, right? It's compute. It is, it adds complexity if you're using services as an extra service call, things like that, right? It's also not always clear what to do with this result when you get it back. If you did find one of these attacks, is the right thing to do to just drop that email, report it, right? Like we need a lot more attention given to what we do and how we properly deploy speech to text to address these attacks. Okay, so with that said, where's this research going next? I want personally to do the following. Fuzz test all of the screen readers. Fuzz test speech to text assistance. Fuzz test all the things and see what breaks. Second, there are a lot of other accessibility tools that have gotten approximately 0 attention from security researchers. I hope some of you in this room will join me in fixing that. If you want to help, if you want to start testing some of these accessibility things, hit me up, right? Happy to collaborate with folks, just see what we find, right? And finally, as I mentioned, all of you threat intel, threat hunter folks out there, go and look for this stuff. We know it exists. Find it, share it, tell us where it is. And this slide, again, mostly looks like gibberish, but it reads,
Dear ShmooCon family, thank you for listening.
ShmooCon family, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak. This slide is labeled Greets. As always, this talk is not purely a product of my own work. I did it extending the work of many other researchers and supported by a wonderful community of friends and hackers, a few I want to specifically call out. Thanks to my colleague Yuan Yu, who gave me valuable feedback and patiently entertained my more absurd ideas, most of which didn't make it into this talk. I want to thank my longtime friend Elsa Junison, who reviewed the presentation for sensitivity and ableism. She has an incredible book out called Being Seen that I highly recommend to everyone. I'd like to thank my colleague David Sang, who gave me feedback and pointers, as well as freely sharing his deep technical expertise and his experience as a screen reader user. Thanks to my additional Payphones hacker crew, who are always supportive of my efforts and are down to do weird hacker shit with me whenever a thought crosses my brain. And thanks to all of you for coming. Much love, hacker family. Go forth and hack the planet. And I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So there are microphones. Please come up and ask a question.
Hello.
Hello.
Do I have a microphone? Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Rob, and I know a thing or two about DNS. And I wanted to know if you were aware of ICANN's guidelines for the implementation of IDNs, version 4.1, which was from September 2022. It supersedes the last version of it, which was written in 2012. And we'll just let that speak for itself. Section 252 says you can't commingle cross-script code points in a single label. And 253 recommends being more careful about confusables, which is their term of art for that. Whole script confusables. So, Cyrillic character set that looks like, Latin. Have you found the ability to register domains that mix stuff recently?
That's an excellent question. If you don't mind, I'll just describe you real quick. Someone asked a question about DNS, deep technical knowledge about it. They're wearing a maroon shirt, jeans, 6 shoes. I have not registered a mixed script domain recently. I think that what you will find is that TLDs and registrars and the combination of them matters a lot more practically than the spec does. And the reason for that is if any combination of registrar and TLD gets this wrong, attackers will just use that registrar and that TLD.
Yeah, it's certainly a Maginot line as far as controls go, right?
Absolutely.
So it'll just drive right around the end of it. But it's certainly, we are signaling that they need to do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
please, when people say that, please double down on that messaging.
I absolutely will. And I apologize for being flippant earlier about it. There is a huge amount of work being done to figure out how we build a community of registrars and TLDs that work with that. I will say the problem for all these confusables has never been the specs, right? They are updated infrequently, as you pointed out. I think that's a very valid criticism. However, I think a lot of the issues come with there's no one single point to enforce those specs, right? And the combination of the community of registrars, the community of TLD owners and things like that makes it so that we can have the best specs in the world that very clearly lay out what's acceptable and what's not. And if we don't drive 100% acceptance, attackers will slip in through whatever.
They're unfortunately also sometimes done by committee and represent what you can get consensus on, which is a low bar. So I had the second question, if I may.
Absolutely.
We know about Levenstein distance, which is good for looking at string similarity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have you found other interesting things that would make good reading in terms of phoneme distance and things that I liked your idea of rendering it via text speech and then shoving it back through speech to text to see what you get. Have you found anything else interesting in that arena?
That's a great question. I've not done enough deep research there. Sorry, the question was, we have various distance measurements for strings, and that often can work visually by comparing the distance. I have not found anything about phoneme distance or things like that. I will confess, when I was doing this, I did a couple of cursory scholar searches for where, is there confusable phoneme, mappings. And what I immediately got was a bunch of very deep linguistics papers that confused and scared me. And so I did not dig into them deeply, because it was clearly not where my expertise lays.
Okay, they confuse and scare me too, and I was hoping you could simplify it for me.
At least we're not alone in our confusion and fear.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the talk.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Someone in the back wearing a long sleeve shirt, jeans, sneakers, cool multicolored mask. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, can we do something like look at the waveform of the legitimate Google.com and compare that to things as they're read out to see if it's a very close but not identical like waveform? I think there's probably something we can do there. I think it's going to be a big challenge for 3 reasons. One, the waveform will differ based on screen reader. So if you're doing DSP and trying to figure out, okay, what is the right Google.com, that has to happen at the screen reader level, and every screen reader has to solve it for themselves, right? Or take the same approach, but generate their own waveforms, right? 2, I'm not convinced that these screen readers will always generate a different waveform for different strings. I think collisions could be close enough that they're generated for different strings identically. The contrapositive of that is my point number 3, which is I'm not convinced that in every case, the same Google.com would generate the same waveform. I think if your hardware is different, your operating system environment is different, things like that, that may generate differences in waveform. That's speculation on my part, because I don't know, because I haven't actually looked at it. So all in service of saying, I think that is an interesting approach to the research. I think it's going to be hard, but at this point, we should try everything we can.
Correct. So even reference waveforms would still have struggled because the hardware and software, even if you reference it across software, it's just such a large vulnerability space.
Correct. Yeah, I think it would just be too hard to guarantee that all the reference waveforms would always line up on every single, yeah. So, my pleasure.
Hello. What are your thoughts / experiences / opinions on how this could affect non-native English speakers who might not know the correct spellings or domains and stuff?
Oh, that's a great question. So, person in black clothes and a very cool, looks like an evil eye or third eye hat, beanie hat, is asking what is the impact for non-native speakers who may confuse these homophones just because they're learning English. I suspect that this is where the Nikiforakis and co, where a lot of their human traffic may have come from, right? People who have normal, honest confusion about these homophones, because English is a very difficult language to learn and has a lot of these homophones. I'm a very auditory person. I grew up in a musical family. I'm a native English speaker, and I mess up homophones fairly often, right? So to your point, I think that this will be a thing where these domains, if they were sound squatted, like Nikiforakis says, will catch some of those people. And the question is, okay, how close can we get this, and how can we find homophones that are more likely to be accidentally put in by a user to target these sites? This is where I think, again, SAIL versus SAIL, S-A-L-E versus S-A-I-L, and things like that. Another one is mail, M-A-I-L versus M-A-L-E, right? I think those are the ones where you're going to see a lot of those accidental confusions. But I think your question's a great one. I think we will see that, and I think we have evidence that's out there. See also my threat hunter folks in the audience. We need you looking for this stuff. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I was curious if there are existing attacks that have been found using, targeting this particular vector, and if so, you sort of mentioned you had two different big examples that I considered. One was google.com, which is something that everyone would be going to quite frequently, and one that was Twitter support, which is something you would be going to in a very sort of specific situation. You probably haven't gone there before. Do you have any insight or even speculation on whether attacks like this would focus on domains people would go to quite a lot, and so some sort of like fingerprinting thing that you learn some extra sound that goes with it that would work would help, or if like novel domains are much more likely to be attacked?
That's a great question. So a person in looks like a purple shirt, but the light in here is not great, and a black jacket was asking about, do we know what kinds of domains we expect to be targeted? Is it high frequency ones that everyone's going to? I suspect there's probably two threat models for this, and I appreciate you leaving the avenue open for speculation, because that's what I'm going to do now. Number one is probably spear phishing, right? If an attacker knows that your cloud admin uses a screen reader, if they can figure out which one, maybe they posted on the forums for, Chromebox asking a question, things like that, they will probably use that to target specific domains that your cloud admin is likely to go to in everyday work to phish their credentials, right? The other is kind of like the mass dragnet thing of like, again, we're an e-commerce site that people are likely to go to, that they are likely to plug their credentials into when they buy things, right? And just sit there and harvest credentials to a site where specifically those credentials are high value for some reason, right? And in that case, we don't particularly, as an attacker, we don't particularly care that the person is using a screen reader. It's just, we want those creds, and this is another way for us to get the creds, right?
Yeah, I think in the cases where it's like a domain where each person would like be familiar with that domain already, that also provides a potential defensive mechanism where what you can do is you can fingerprint the text of the domain in some way and play it alongside the domain whenever it appears.
That's not a bad idea. My colleague David Sang made the point that because he has used the same screen reader for so long, he is very keyed into subtle changes in domain sounds. Yeah. And so even when they update the screen reader sometimes, he gets a little bit like shock and paranoia, right? Like things like that. So, or even if he doesn't, people do, right? They get used to this, was his point, right? And so I think that having some other key information that if we know it is this actual domain, like our browser knows that we're actually going to Google, right? We have some sort of allow list where it says like, okay, also read this other information or read this other thing. The question then becomes is how do we stop attackers from just appending that on to the end of their URL? That I think it will probably raise the cost of the attacker, which is always good, but.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. First off, thank you. That was an awesome talk. It's an
My
interesting
pleasure.
topic that these things that not a lot of people talk about are always interesting. So it sounds like these screen readers and accessibility tools are not very, very heavily tested because an enterprise has this many endpoints and only this many are using the accessibility tool. So we have to worry about where we're going to make the most change. However, when you're doing reconnaissance as an attacker on an organization, you want to know what type of software they're running, and you often don't know without running some type of payload that's going to attach to their browser, and you start getting all this yada yada. If you just go to LinkedIn and say, who's blind?
Yeah.
And now you say, who works at that organization that's blind? You don't even have to target a single organization. You could just say, who is blind, period, in this industry? Target them. It sounds like people could be revealing information about the software that's running on the organizations where they work without realizing it, and that organizations aren't necessarily calling it out. And if the software is not thoroughly tested, then when people are throwing attacks at it, people aren't going to necessarily notice. And I feel like that is an obvious gaping hole for a social engineer to say, wait a second, anything involving disabilities, I want to go right after that. And there's probably only a handful of these products that do it. We'll find the vulnerabilities in all 5 and throw it. It seems concerning.
I think you're right. So person in long sleeve black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, jeans, very comfortable looking hiking boots, raises the point that like there's other information leakage here in things like LinkedIn and social media that shows that these screen readers or accessibility things will be running in an organization's network. I think you're right, and I think 2 things. Number one, this I think increases the need for us to do fuzz testing and things like that, because I also think that there are probably RCEs and things like that in at least some of these tools, right? I have not had the time to find any myself, but I speculate they exist because, to your point, this is an area that where not a lot of effort's been given. So if we have, folks out there who are identifiable from LinkedIn or other social media, that could very easily be a way for attackers to generate a target list, right? Because like I said,
Something to think
attackers
about,
don't
yeah.
pull punches, right? They're not going to lay off just because someone has a disability. So,
Cool, thanks.
my pleasure. Okay, I got the stop sign. Thank you all so much, ShmooCon. You've been great.